Wise Child by Monica Furlong, Chapter 8, Temptation. The winter days were upon us. Each morning Juniper lit a fire. In the big room in ruby and pearl sat one on each side of it like statues. I no longer had to wash myself in the yard, but each evening carried water to my nest in a jug and washed the next morning from a bowl. It was getting cold in the house, and I didn't wash any more than Juniper made me. I was getting better and better at my lessons. I could write well now, mostly because of practice. I wrote down poems and recipes. Sometimes I opened Juniper's big books about plants and spells, and because I was now learning Latin, I could read a word here and there. What was nice about the colder days was that we both had more time. Instead of walking the fields or working in the garden until my legs ached, we were often at home now in the afternoons. Juniper was still busy spinning and sewing and making me, unenthusiastic about it as ever, spin and sew too. We also did some dyeing in wonderful greens and reds, using herbs instead of seaweed. I enjoyed that. Somehow, the winter rhythm of our work felt relaxed and easy. There no longer were flowers or berries to gather, nor roots to dig, now that the ground was frozen, and only a very few seeds left to collect. More and more we sat by the fire and talked. Juniper told me some amazing stories about Cornwall and Ireland, and Dalriada in the olden days, stories about the dragon of Benenfada, who got impaled by a hero on a spiked jetty because he was so greedy, and Ossian, whose mother was a hind, and Etienne, who was turned by her jealous stepmother into a scarlet fly. There was the naughty hero, Cuchulainn, and the giantess, Bin Behel, who sang so beautifully that the birds and beasts stopped to listen to her. Every year she plunged herself into the sea to renew her youth, but one year she did not do so and died of old age. My favourite stories, however, were about Tern and Og, the Isles of Eternal Youth. Some people claimed they could see the isle in the western sea at sunset, but I had no idea how to get to them. Juniper said that when people reached them and walked in the marvellous palaces, it happened by a sort of accident, not because they were trying especially. Manon, the king of the Isles, would withdraw his cloak of invisibility only for people he particularly favoured. It might be a poor fisherman or a farmer's boy, a milkmaid or a prince. When they reached the isle, however, all their problems were solved. They knew how they should live their lives in the future. I hoped so much that Manon would decide to favour me. Now that the days were shorter, I was slower and sleepier, as Juniper said, like a little mole just beginning to hibernate. This was partly because of the coming of winter, I suppose, but also because I had relaxed into life in Juniper's house, as if being there was the most natural thing in the world. All the strain of the last months had drained away. I was in a safe place and could rest in it. When Maeve left, where did she go? I asked Juniper once. Somehow I had never dared ask anyone that question. South to England, she said. A man from Northumbria took her away. But I was her little girl. She should have stayed here with me. Juniper would not say yes or no to this, but looked at me with her wide, clear gaze. Maybe it was better as it was. I was remembering something I did not want to remember. The amulets in my mother's room. A queer sort of doll I had found hidden there that Maeve smacked me for playing with. Something peculiar in a jar, some liquid I had once seen her pour into a guest's food. Was my mother a Doran? No. A witch, then? Juniper hesitated again. She did magic, she said at last. I think for herself. Did Finbar like her doing magic? By the time he knew, it was too late. I thought I detected a sort of bitterness in her voice. She was amazingly beautiful, you know. It confused people. Suddenly there was something I needed to know, but it was painful to ask. Am I beautiful? No, Juniper said calmly. Ugly, then? No, she laughed. Certainly not. Certainly not. You're going to look lovely. In December, we woke to frost drawings on the windows, and I shivered my way down to breakfast. Juniper produced an enormous black fur from a cabinet. A bear's coat, she said it was, and placed it on my bed at night as I lay in my nest. I loved to stroke it with my hands before I went to sleep. "I have to go away soon," Juniper said one day, "for 3 days. Suddenly I felt very small and afraid. "Who will light the fire?" I asked in a small voice. "You will. It's quite easy." I could not speak because of the lump in my throat. "What will I do when I'm afraid of the dark?" I asked her shamefacedly at last. "You will wrap yourself in your bear's coat, and you won't be afraid," she said. I wanted to shout and stamp and say that I was too small to be left for so long, that she was bad to do it to me, that she would go away as Maeve had done, and I would never see her again, but instead I was dumb and desolate. I went out and sat in the barn. "I hate her," I said to Tilly, who turned around to give me her sweet animal glance. "When?" I asked Juniper that evening. "In a week," she said. "I don't want you to go." She picked me up and sat me on her lap. "I know, nothing will make it any better, but you will be all right. I will think of things for you to do while I'm away." "Work!" I said scornfully. "Well, work does make the time go more quickly," she said. "And you enjoy it more than you think." She did leave me a lot of work, too. There was a long piece of writing to do in a script I tried to model on hers. There was some spinning. I groaned when she mentioned this. There was Tilly to feed and exercise. There was a poem about storms and clouds I was learning to sing to the harp. "You're not taking Tilly?" I asked disbelievingly. Actually, it would be very comforting to have Tilly as company. "No, so you must take good care of her, and of the cats, and Daisy, and the chickens." I had to practice the harp, make cheese, put food out for Cormac, draw and carry the water I needed each day, prepare my meals. "You will be able to tell me about it all when I come back." "You will come back?" "Wise child, promise." "I promise, as much as anyone can promise it." "You mean you might die?" "I might, but I won't." She said goodbye to me the night before she went. I will be leaving very early in the morning. She seemed to make no preparations, none of the elaborate packing of food and possessions I remembered from Finbar's departures. I felt sure that I would wake to hear her go, but I slept so soundly under my bear's coat that it was broad daylight when I awoke. I jumped up at once, and wrapping the black fur around me, I ran downstairs in my bare feet. Already a fire was burning in the grate, and Ruby was purring in front of it. My breakfast was laid out on the table, with a tiny pink winter flower in the middle of my plate. It was very consoling, as real as a kiss. I thought how easy it was to be alone now, when the winter sun shone in the sky like a primrose, and the sky was a clear blue. I was scared of nightfall, but I would not let myself think like that. I milked Daisy, who was lowing angrily, fed Tilly, ate my porridge, and washed dish and pan in the careful way Juniper had taught me. I swept the floor, built up the fire, and settled on my writing. I was very busy. I felt very busy, very grown up. I was enjoying myself more than I knew. When the early winter twilight came, I bolted the doors, something we did when Juniper was at home, and sitting on a chair near the fire, I tried to tune the harp and eventually played it. Ruby pushed at my legs as if she too missed Juniper. Going upstairs to bed was scary. The shadow on the stairs up to the attic wavered in the candlelight like a thin, thin man, but I looked away, fled into Juniper's bedroom and into my nest, pulling off my smock and blowing out the candle in 2 quick movements. I felt safer in the dark somehow. I wanted so much to go to sleep and not wake up until morning, and to my pleasure and surprise I did just that. I had survived so far, 1 day. The second day was rather slower than the first. The feeling of my cleverness at managing everything was giving way to the sinking feeling of being all alone. At midday I saddled Tilly and went down to the village. The young children were at school, and my aunt was unusually alone at home apart from the baby, Nicole. "Where's Juniper?" she asked innocently. I did not want her to know that Juniper had left me. Village people never left children all alone. "She sent me down on an errand," I lied loyally. "She is kind to you?" my aunt asked. I said, embarrassed. "She must be feeding you well. You've grown." "She does." I didn't want to discuss Juniper, just to be with a grown-up for a bit. She gave me a cake, and when I had finished it, put the baby in my arms so he would stop crying, which he did. She talked about my cousins, but I could feel her underlying curiosity. What's Juniper's house like, then? I began to realize that Coleman said little, if anything, about his visits to the White House. She'd come and see it one day, I said, but I knew she wouldn't. I could not stay long. I did not want to risk being out in the dark, and I had to feed the animals and shut them up. The fire had gone out when I got home, and I could not be bothered to relight it. I ate my supper and went straight to bed, wanting the morning to come quickly. Perhaps because of this I woke up in the dark, hearing a purposeful creaking on the stairs. The door softly opened, and there was the quick patter of feet and a thump as Ruby landed heavily on my chest. "Oh, Ruby!" Even with the cat's presence, I was lonely, and the night seemed to stretch on forever. Dawn was gloomy and ominous, an angry red, like a sore eye. I was sick of being brave and sensible. I just wanted to be alone. I felt tired and sad when I got up, but I forced myself to wash and dress, to sweep the ashes from the fire and relight it, to put the porridge on the fire while I went to milk Daisy. Looking after the animals helped a lot. I even got out Tilly's brush and groomed her carefully, knowing how much she liked it. I made the same hissing noise Juniper always made as she worked on Tilly, and the donkey turned around and looked as if he thought I might be Juniper. So that it seemed like a reward when I went back into the house, and there, coming through the doorway, was Coleman. "Mum said you came today. I thought you might need something." He was his usual small, cool self. I told him about Juniper being away, though without telling him how lonely I felt, nor how delighted I was to see him. "What about school?" I asked him. I played truant. I looked at him with admiration. Coleman did not like breaking rules much. For him it took courage. I didn't mention it, of course, but seemed at once to cook, knowing that he would be started at once to cook, knowing that he would be as hungry as ever. We sat together on a cushion in front of the fire, eating eggs and bacon and toast and a hot drink Juniper had taught me to make out of dandelions. As before, I watched his pale face fill out with the warmth of the food. When he had eaten, he was full of questions. "What about the cellar and the jewels?" As it happened, I had discovered the whereabouts of the cellar. Juniper and I had been cleaning a few days before. Juniper had moved a table, shifted the wall hanging behind it, and said, "Look wise, child, this door goes to some caves under the cliff." "May we go down there?" I asked, shining-eyed. "One day, when you're a bit bigger and we're not so busy." The door had heavy bolts, which puzzled me a bit. Why should anyone want to get into the house from the cellar? When the tapestry swung back again, all was hidden, however. "I know where the cellar is," I couldn't resist telling Coleman, "only we can't go there." I could feel an ineffably smug expression settled on my face. "Don't believe you," Coleman said jeeringly. "You're just making it up." We quarrelled about the cellar for a quarter of an hour, Coleman insisting that I did not know where it was, and I swearing that I did. In the end, I thought there would be no harm in showing him the door. "Now's our chance. It's locked." Before I could stop him, Coleman had pulled back the tapestry and started unfastening the bolts. Though he had to stand on a chair to reach the top one, he turned the handle and the door began to creak open. "No, it isn't," he said. "Juniper wouldn't like it." "She wouldn't know. We'd be back before she returns." "Juniper knows everything." "If she really didn't want you to go down there, she'd keep it locked." "Juniper doesn't think like that." "All the same," I reasoned, I had gone into the attic without asking her, and she hadn't minded at all, and she had shown me where the cellar door was without any hesitation. I didn't know what to think. "It's dark," I said. "We could take candles, or the lantern," I said, being helpful. I didn't want Coleman to think I was scared, which I was. "Think of jewels," he said, his eyes big. "Great handfuls of rubies and emeralds." Coleman and I were both fascinated by the idea of heaps of jewels. He had led, and I followed, from far back as I could remember. I forgot Juniper and my fears of what lay beyond the cellar door. "We could just take a look." Together we stood before the door while he swung it back. There was a flight of steps, neat, clean, like everything that belonged to Juniper, that went down into the darkness. In 5 minutes I had fetched the lantern and lit it. I had put another candle end in my pocket, and the two of us began the long descent.